stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like to welcome everybody to our meeting tonight. Our purpose is primarily to hear the results of the elementary facility survey. We need to approve our agenda. Is the agenda going to stay the way it is, or are there some changes?
No changes for me.
Very good. I would entertain a motion, please.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion we approve the agenda as printed.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes, and we'll move forward with our agenda. Our comments and communications section. Is there anyone in the public who wishes to comment this evening?
There is no one today.
Okay, very good. Are there any comments by board trustees? Okay, any board committee reports? Very good. We're moving right along here. So we're here now to hear process survey results regarding the elementary facilities planning. I'll turn it over to you, Mark.
Oh, thank you, Randy. Randy thought it would be helpful to spend just a little bit of time before we have Gary do the survey results to just review the process for our community, to kind of summarize what was presented to the board in February of this year. So I'm going to do that, and before I turn it over to Gary, I'm going to work from over here. Yes, because it's easier. Receiver still on here? Should be. You have it still on. Okay, there we go. Now we go. Yeah, system's on. Is your receiver need to be removed by any chance? Could be a short meeting.
That's all I have.
And we all say yay.
You may have to restart our receiver.
It says it's connected. I can definitely restart it.
We did it this way because we thought it'd be easier to work on with one computer.
Yeah. Whose idea was that? Is there I should see a login screen.
Yeah.
Got it on the USB, Mark. We can go to something else if you want. I don't know. It was up before, it's gone now. There it goes. Good old Microsoft. That's me.
There we go.
That's your presentation.
All right.
Apologize for that.
Thank you. No problem. We've gotten used to dealing with technology issues this year and trying to make the most out of it. So this is, again, for purposes of review, many of these will look familiar to you. Just want to go through these to remind you of why we're here, where we are. And obviously it's because of the condition of our elementary schools, at least the 5 oldest buildings in the district. We've had a lot of community support over the years when we've had bond issues, and they supported schools back in the 60s when these facilities were built. They supported our secondary facilities, and now we're back dealing with elementary schools. And a lot of this is being driven by the long-range facility plan that the district came up with. And when we updated that in 2019, there was a recommendation that said in 5 years or so, as these current projects are winding down, you really need to go back and start doing something about elementary schools. So that, in addition to the number of changes that we're experiencing and how education is delivered at the elementary level, some of the concerns listed there are still issues that have to be dealt with. So how did we get here? At least in more recent history, in 2012-13, there was a facility assessment that was completed that took a look at all the district facilities, rated them, took a look at condition, and really gave us a snapshot of where we were as a district in terms of facilities. In 2014, we hired Bill DeYoung. Bill DeYoung came in and really helped us put together a long-range facilities plan. We worked with steering committees. We had community dialogues. We had surveys that we conducted that provided input into the master plan, and that resulted in some recommendations that came to the board. The board implemented the recommendation of going to voters, and in 2015, a $144 million bond issue was approved to build 2 new middle schools, renovate West Middle School, provide 2 pools and 2 stadiums. And then in 2019, we again formed a steering committee, followed a very similar process to what we did in 2014. We updated the recommendations based on input from our community through surveys, through community dialogues, etc., and now have an updated facilities master plan that primarily focused on elementary facilities. So since that time, we've been very busy. We developed educational specifications for elementary schools, which was one of the recommendations that came out of the updated plan. We conducted an elementary feasibility study that really took a look at all of our current sites as well as some additional properties that the district has. So we evaluated Amberley site, Angling, Central L, Haverhill, and Woodland. We also took a look at PCEC facility, the West Campus, where West Middle School is located, and the property that the district owns on South Westnedge. And those were all part of that feasibility study that was presented to the board a little over a year ago. We heard community input. By the way, that feasibility study was also something that was recommended through the Facility Master Planning Steering Committee. We heard community input through, again, dialogue sessions. We held 2 of those and allowed people to participate remotely. We also held informational sessions, primarily with the citizens who live in that Southwestnedge area. We invited them to this room. I think Bob McGraw and I and several members of the team were here to talk about the plan that had been put together at that time. And then we conducted a survey that Gary conducted in March of 2020. We began considering an election. We were at least initially prepared to go to voters in August of 2020, and then COVID hit, and things came to a screeching halt. We just decided that that was not a good time to continue going down this path. So I remind you again that a lot of this work was determined or guided by these guiding principles. We developed guiding principles for the projects back in 2015. We revisited those, modified them for elementary projects, and these are the guiding principles that we incorporated into our thinking as we made decisions and evaluated the various plans. Last year, I believe it was in February, the board looked at several scenarios. There were 5 different scenarios that the board looked at. Scenario 1 was looking at the facilities from a remodeling standpoint. Scenario 2 was replacing 5 schools with 5 new buildings, and in that process relocating Central Elementary School to the South Westlands property and increasing its capacity from 450 to 600 students. Scenario 3, as we worked through that, was replacing 5 schools with 5 other schools, but we were looking at how we might configure the population in each of those buildings. So both scenarios 3 and 4 were the 5 for 5 option, but looking at 300 student buildings, 600 student buildings, 450 student buildings. So that was the scenarios 3 and 4. Scenario 5 was replacing 5 buildings with 4 buildings, and all of those schools would be 600 student facilities. So through a process of deliberation and taking a look at pros and cons, the board preferred scenario 2B2, which was to build 5 new elementary schools to replace the 5 schools listed there, remodeling Mooresbridge, moving Central L to the Southwestlands property, increasing its capacity to 600, and then using Central L as a swing school, because we knew that based on the plan we had last year, we could not build some of our buildings without having a swing school for students to occupy while their school was being built. And then we would repurpose Central L after construction. We didn't really define what it would be used for because it would be several years down the road, but it could have been used for to replace the PCEC facility and the programs that are located there. We did a survey. Gary conducted a survey in 2020. You see there we had 1,350 Portage residents who responded, and there were a number of additional questions that were asked to give us some feedback as a school district. There were some issues that arose there that there were some folks, and you can see the percentages there, that talked about fiscal responsibility. Some people felt that we were going back to them too quickly after the 2015 bond, even though the 5-year time period was one that came through on the recommendations. 5 years flies by pretty quick and may not seem like it's time, but we're following the recommendations. And then there were still some people that made comment about the 2 stadiums, even though that was something that was a separate question and approved by voters. There are still some long-held beliefs that 2 stadiums are unnecessary. So that came out in the survey. We did not have the 50% or more of support on that proposed bond. So that entered into our conversation last year. And for these reasons, I mean, cost was an issue. We went to the voters, I think at that time it was $155 million to implement the plan. People felt that we needed to consider more strongly renovating as opposed to building new. And then there were a variety of other responses that came to us. So cost, Central L location was an issue. I know that created a little bit of controversy, and still the overcrowding, whether it's class sizes or building size. There were some issues that people had with the fact that our elementary schools were overcrowded. So what's changed in the past year? Well, costs continue to go up. I'm not sure how many are following the current pricing right now, but cost of construction has gone up, and it will continue to go up, although I think we're seeing probably an accelerated or a little blip right now with the supply chain that's causing some of the escalation, but I think that's seen as being able to level out over the next couple of years. And then we had this unique opportunity to maintain the same debt levy that we have, the 6.85 mils. We were going to voters not asking for an increase, but asking that we allowed to levy the 6.85 mils. So this would be really our last opportunity to do that without having to raise or increase taxes. So in February of this year, the board took a look at what we started referring to as pathways, is 3 different pathways to how to move forward. One is to stick with the original plan, as we did last year, pick up where we left off and go back to voters on that. Pathway 2 was taking that original plan and relocating, rather than relocating Central L, is leaving Central L at its existing site. We did some further site reviews during the course of the year and found that we could do something on the site to replace Central L either as a 1-story or a 2-story building. What would change in that is what we had available to use as a swing school, because Central L could not be used as a swing school after the new Central L was built. We would have to raise that to develop the parking lots, the drives, and the play areas. So it forced us to look at another facility. The facility that we evaluated that could serve that purpose is PCEC, that currently houses our community high school and Curious Kids programming. And then pathway 3 was still to consider the remodeling option. So from those, there are pluses and minuses for each one of those pathways. Primarily, pathways 1 and 2 provide new buildings, which have a life expectancy of 50+ years, versus remodeling or reconfiguring of 30 or so years. It would be awful hard to remodel our buildings, our existing elementary buildings, to really offer the kind of learning environments that we want for our kids. That space is just not flexible. And as the last bullet point shows there, when the cost exceeds 70% of new, it's recommended that we go new, and certainly those costs for remodeling were exceeding that 70% mark, and we still wouldn't get the kind of space or square footage that new facilities will give us. So those were looked at, and through that discussion, the board decided to really abandon the first pathway and the remodeling pathway and go with this new pathway here of replacing 5 schools with new facilities and remodeling Mooresbridge Elementary School, using building Central L at its current location, and then using PCEC as a swing school. So that kind of same thing that I said here, but with Amberley being built without using Central as a swing school, because we would, in that plan last year, we would have taken Amberley students, put them here at Central, and then raised the existing Amberley to build a new school on that, roughly on the same footprint. However, in this scenario, in this pathway, we wouldn't have any place to put Amberley students, the size of that population. So we would have to build Amberley on the Amberley site, I've got another slide here that shows where we would do that. And then you see the sequence that would have to be followed in this new plan, and that's primarily driven by what we have available as a swing school. And again, it's about a 10 to 12 year schedule from once we get started. And we're able to raise the cost of $175 million approximately can be achieved without increasing the millage rate of 6.85. So this is, there are 2 slides here back to back. This is showing the Central L new building being built just west of the existing facility as a 1-story concept, and here as a 2-story concept. So that's both of those scenarios would work there. We think we can get a play area adjacent to the existing middle school, adjacent to the existing elementary school, which makes it safer for students to come out of the building rather than having to cross a parking lot and go into that play field that's located further to the north. And then when we look at the Amberley site, again, the Amberley site does pose some restrictions because of the two wells that are located there. We have perimeters around those wells that are protected, that we cannot build on or encroach on for uses that we would like to. So that, forces us into putting that building, more to the north of where the existing building is. And here it's shown as a one-story facility. You can see the construction limits outlined there around the perimeter. That's roughly the area that would be impacted during construction. So you can see with the one-story concept, it does encroach on those woods just to the north, or to the northeast, a little bit more than a two-story facility in that site. So the revised plan where the board landed really achieves our guiding principles very nicely. It responds to the concerns that we heard from the community about the location of Central L. Amberley students would not have to relocate to the central campus on this case. They would be able to stay in their building while their new building was being constructed. It helps us reduce overcrowding primarily because we're able to add 150 students to Central L's capacity, which allows us to make some modifications in a few of the attendance areas, which will in turn allow us to move students that currently attend Mooresbridge and Amberley around so that we're more balanced in our class sizes, in our building sizes. The cons on this one, again, were the cost. Costs have gone up from $155 to $175 million, so that's still a kind of a downside to this. The total cost is higher. I guess I should say community members still had concern about costs, whether it's 155 or more. There are still costs on that can't be avoided on this, and then some of those woods at Amberley would be affected. So our next steps are to have Gary review the survey that was taken this year, and the survey was based on this pathway, this central pathway, pathway 2 that the board landed on, determined the projects to be completed. We're on a tight timeline to get this. If we're going to vote on this in August, the board has to pass a resolution by Monday, or on Monday the 10th, no later than. And then we have to get the language to the county clerks the following day. So we have been working with our attorneys in developing the appropriate paperwork and have that ready for resolution for the board for next week, making some final changes to that this week, and we'll have it ready for next week should the board decide to move in this direction. So that's all I have in the way of a review. I hope I hit the key points, and if there's anything that you didn't understand or want me to touch on, we've got myself and all the other experts in the room here as well. If not,
No, thank you.
I had one more question. Is PCEC large enough to be a swing school?
when we combine both the programs that are housed in both sides, yes.
Okay.
We would have to make provisions for both of those programs
Got it, okay.
while, before we can modify that building as a swing school, but yes, there are enough classrooms there. For the schools that need it, the schools that would need that would be the last three in the project, so Angling,
Angling.
and there are smaller buildings in the district.
Be the last two.
The last two.
That's
I'm sorry, three, yeah, the three are in the first round, the two, and then we have the
Okay.
remodeling of Mooresbridge, which would happen in there. That's why I couldn't come up with a third one, because there isn't a third one.
Okay, good.
All right, Gary.
Thank you.
Good evening, trustees. It's a pleasure to be back with you almost 1 year to the date that I was back to tell you about last year's survey, to tell you about this year's survey, the 2021 community survey. Just like we had last year, it was an online survey. We asked 18 questions this time, slightly shorter than last time. As Mark pointed out, the conversation was around this new Pathway 2 option, and so we had a little more streamlined questions for this time. Same time as last year, we went from the 17th to the 31st of March, so we're looking at data that's approximately 6 weeks old. Last year we did it at the same time. The difference between last year and this year is that the district shut down due to COVID in the middle of last year's window, whereas this year we are where we are. Finally, it was open as it was last year to all residents of the Portage School District, and you had to be at least 18 years old. Having said that, our results for this year, we had 1,085 usable responses from residents of the district. At margin of error is plus or minus 3%. I will point out in one instance where that comes into play is I ask you to look at the results, but it's a very good margin of error in the sense of we can make some strong conclusions from what we see. As last year, we did find that if you look at the responses by where people live in the district, we got more responses from residents who were living near the Central Elementary. This, I don't think, surprises any of us because last year's plan had that vacant property being used for the new Central Elementary. Because that happened, we had to weight the responses. So we would take and say the proportion from Central is this much, it should be this much, and the proportion from another school is a little smaller, should be a little larger, and so we do that weighting. So we did that process last year, we did the identical process this year to balance the responses based on the proportionality of where people live within the district. As with last year, there are 2 report documents. The first report document, simply entitled Report, has the responses for all of the questions. The second document, entitled Responses Listing, has the responses to the open-ended questions. So for example, we asked, do you feel the Portage Public Schools are fiscally responsible? If they said no, we asked them why. All those responses are in the responses listing. So in sum total, you've got about 170 pages of survey results. The report on the left has all the questions. The one on the right has all the responses. I just want to be very clear about the weighting that we did. When we weighted the responses, we kept every response that was a right in the blank response. So if they had an open-ended thing and they said something, we put them in there. So everybody who said something, their comments are listed in here. We did not leave any of them out. We asked, as we did previously, do we think that the elementary schools need improvement? We've got over half of the survey respondents, about 57.6%, who said yes, we believe that the elementary school facilities need to be improved, similar to last year's study. We also asked the question, do you feel Portage Public Schools are fiscally responsible? The importance of this question is that if they don't feel the schools are fiscally responsible, they're unlikely to approve the bond. So there's a connection between this question and that question. So this time you'll note that we have just under half at about 47.2% who said yes, they feel Portage Public Schools are fiscally responsible. And then we had, give or take, about a third who were unsure and about 20% who said no. And just like last year, we asked, why do you think we are not responsible? And you'll note that these responses are really not much different than we saw last year. There's a sensitivity to the 2 stadiums, which, as Mark said, was a separate ballot issue, which was approved by voters, and which was 5 years ago. But there's still a sensitivity to it that says we don't need 2 stadiums to this day. There were people who felt we were always asking for money, people who felt that we were wasteful in our spending, and finally a cohort of people who felt that we should be looking at remodeling versus building new. And so these were reasons why they thought we weren't fiscally responsible. My counsel to you is to take a look at the responses listing report, and you can get a flavor for all the different things that people said. But these 4 themes repeat with great frequency. You'll have no problem seeing these themes repeatedly in those responses. We put the plan out to everyone, and within the report document on page 35, I believe, you can see what we put out there to everyone. Actually on page 34. The information that we gave basically spelled out what are our current elementary school conditions, what's happening with these buildings, what happened with the plan and the committee that looked at these buildings, and then we talked about some options for going forward to address these concerns, and we talked about this pathway number 2 in detail. A new plan would build 5 elementary schools to replace the 5 in question, Amberley, Angling, Central, Haverhill, and Woodland. We're going to renovate Mooresbridge, and it talked about where they were going to be built and what their capacities were going to be. And we explained that it would take about 10 to 11 years to do this. Do you think that's acceptable? So after giving them all that information, we had about 57.5% say this was an acceptable plan. Compared to the plan that was put forth last year, it was about 45%. So you can see there's a significantly higher level of acceptability. But we can then also look and see that we have about 1/4 of them who say it's not acceptable, and we have 16% who are unsure. Again, we want to ask people, well, so why isn't it acceptable? What is it that you're not happy with this plan? And we have 6 themes that show up with great frequency. The first one, constructing new schools instead of remodeling. I think that's pretty straightforward in the sense of what people are getting at there. Cost. Cost comes at us 2 ways. One is the $175,000 price tag is a cost. The other cost is I'm already paying for what I was paying for in 2015. Now you're asking me to pay for more. So it's a cost that transcends just this project. It's the larger cost of what we're paying to renovate schools currently as well. Overcrowding. The sensitivity there is there's a small group of residents who recognize that current elementary schools are overcrowded, and they were concerned that this plan may not go far enough to address that overcrowding. So we know that the new central in this plan would add 150 students to it, but there are some parents and survey respondents, but especially those who are parents in those elementary schools, that question if that is enough increase in capacity. Declining enrollment, this is one that we saw this year that we didn't see last year due to COVID and what's going on within the district. All students are not in the district, parents have taken their kids out, they've heard these things happening. And so the general theme here, when you read the comments, you'll see a lot of parents who are going to say, oh, don't you think we should wait until this settles out to see what our enrollment is? Maybe we don't need extra capacity due to this situation. Unnecessary, exactly what it sounds like. We don't need this. Schools are fine. Why are we having this conversation? And then finally, timing. This is the second COVID-related reason where people are saying this is just the wrong time. We're in a situation where we've got some economic stressors on us. We've got a lot of people who are struggling to get by. We shouldn't be asking for this type of investment at this time. The second question in the paired set of questions, and we used the same structure last year, is the question regarding supporting the bond. And you will find what we gave to everyone on page 42. So this is what everyone saw on page 42. What's really important about this is that unlike last year, this year we're working with a different concept. Our concept here is we can hold the millage rate the same if we approve it at this time. So what we did in asking the question is we told respondents, if you vote for this, your millage or your taxes will change by 0. You will pay the same amount as you paid last year. It's going to hold your taxes consistent. We then told them, if you don't vote for this, you're going to save money. And here's how much you're going to save. So we actually put a table in here that said, if your house has a market value of $250,000, you're going to save $185 a year. If you don't do this, you'll pick up a savings. Having very carefully explained that so that they understood, because we didn't want to pull the wool over anyone's eyes. We didn't want them to think like there is a benefit if you don't approve it. The benefit is your taxes do go down. We had 62%, or just under 2/3, say they are willing to support a bond. 25 years, 5 buildings, Amberley, Angling, Central, Haverhill, Woodland, renovating Mooresbridge, technology, and buses. We had about 1/4 who said no, 26%, and we had about 10% who were unsure. And as before, Why wouldn't they support the bond? And you'll see 6 reasons again, some of them very similar. Building new versus remodeling, cost, declining enrollment. Lack of trust in mismanagement of past buildings. When you read the comments in the responses listing, you will see some comments about issues with potentially perceived challenges of current building projects. The most obvious example I can give you is the internet not working in the middle schools. How can you spend all this money on middle schools and not put internet in them when the internet doesn't work? Why should we trust you with the money? You're mismanaging. We can't trust you to do it. That's where this is coming in. Timing and unnecessary, I covered those before. Same concerns up there again. If you wouldn't approve it, would you consider approving a less expensive option? We had about 28% who said they would support a less expensive option. Having said that, the challenge is always when we ask what is a less expensive option, if we don't put something out there and we just say how much less are you willing to pay, we get answers that are all over the board. So there's about 6 or 7 pages in the report of what people were willing to pay, and some of them are very specific. I'll pay this millage level, I'll pay this dollar amount. Others of them didn't know exactly what they would pay. What I think is really important here is that just a sheer move in cost, I can't say that you pick up all 28% support if you just lowered the cost a little bit, because not everybody was able to specify how much lower that cost would have to be. This is a new question this year. When I met with you and we talked about doing the survey, I said to you I would do my best to try to understand the impact of COVID on this decision. And the question that we rolled with is, due to the uncertainty of the coronavirus COVID-19 situation, do you think how you would vote on the bond request in August 2021 could change from how you answered the survey today? That's the question we asked. So you can see 3/4 of the people said, nope, if I support it now, I'll support it then. If I don't support it now, won't support it then. But you've got just under 10% in this yellow slice that are saying to us, yes, there's a possibility what I said today, I might not be able to say that in August. And there was about 14% who were unsure. So we need to recognize that if we were to go back and look at this and we say, oh yeah, 62% are willing to support this, there may be some percentage of that, because the COVID and the uncertainty of the COVID situation, that would say no in August while they're saying yes today. In summary, we talked to 1,085 residents. 57% felt facilities should be improved. 57% felt the plan that was being shared with them was acceptable, and 62% would vote to approve the bond. I've hit the highlights. I will happily answer whatever questions you may have. Keith?
Can an estimate be made on the unsures? Do they tend to fall 50-50 when it all comes to reality, or is there a different guess to be made at that?
That's a tough one for me, Keith. I mean, you could make this argument, and I've made it before in other cases and would probably feel somewhat comfortable here, is that if you took this unsure, it might fall proportionally just about the same. So you would take maybe about, this would give or take is maybe 75% of that, and this is maybe 25%, in that proportion, and you could make the argument that that would swing that way. One of the things that's interesting, though, is people who say yes or no are also ones, when we look at the question, did you vote in the last bond election, which would have been 2015, they're the ones that are more likely to have voted. The ones who are unsure are the ones who are less likely to have voted. So in other words, interestingly enough, if you voted in 2015, you're less likely to be in this category and more likely to be in one of these two. I'm not suggesting unsure people wouldn't vote this time. I'm just saying there is this connection, though. What other questions might you have?
I went back to the 2015 survey. I don't know if there's a correlation here, but 62.5% in in that survey agreed to vote to approve the 3 middle school plan.
Yes,
Very similar.
yes. Yeah, I will admit to you, Randy, that I did also go back and look at the 2015 survey as we conducted the survey to look. What I would really want to do, if we want to see if there's some strong comparative, is put the data sets together and analyze them all in one data, which I have not done, but I thought it was interesting because I had the same memory you did. Boy, that seems really familiar, because I knew it was 62% in 2015, and here we are 62% again. As you know, last year though, that yes vote for the plan that we put up in
Yeah.
last year's survey was under 50%.
Right.
Does anybody remember what the actual vote was in 15? The yes votes?
I think it was higher than what was in our percentage.
It was 1 percentage point higher, Rusty.
1%?
It was-
So I was under by 1.
Yeah.
In the stadium,
Oh,
it's
that's
passed
right,
by
yeah.
54.
Yeah, I remember,
or
yeah.
6, something like that.
What other questions can I answer for you?
So, Gary, I was reading through a great report, and some of the verbatim comments you had in there about folks who were saying no,
Yes.
and then they, the free text, and more than a few of those responses was, we can't take on another tax increase,
Yes.
but this wouldn't increase the millage.
Yes.
So could you just reflect on what somebody might be thinking when they respond that way, just to help us get a better sense of
Well,
kind of what some community members are thinking?
yeah, we're really working with two things here, Bo, between last year and this year. And COVID isn't even one I'm gonna mention here, but the two things we're working with is last year it was an increase. So there might have been a proclivity for someone to look at this and go, oh, they're asking for another increase again, without actually maybe taking the time to read it.
Yeah.
I feel like I've done my job by putting 724 words on a page before asking them the question, but I can't say that everybody read
Yeah.
all 724 words. So, to that end, it was an increase last year. Oh my gosh, they're coming back with an increase again. We can't afford another increase. I'm not even going to worry about reading what it is, even though we were explicitly clear that you'd have a savings if you voted no. So, we kind of got that play there. The other thing that's going on is that, last year it was to put Central Elementary on the property on Southwest Niche. And so there was a lot of sensitivity to that. That was the number one reason why they didn't like the plan. You note that didn't show up this year at all. There were, out of 1,085 people, 7 of them who mentioned the location this year. 7. And their question was, what are you going to do with the property? Last year, there were almost 200 who said, don't build it on this property. My point here is that we have maybe some memory, bias, concern from doing it last year with one plan and coming to this one, that if you're not paying close enough attention, or you just want to make 100% sure that your concerns are reflected, you may think things haven't changed. And indeed, we have a different location, and indeed, we have a maintenance of the millage rate, effectively the same tax levy to do that. That's my theory on it.
Yeah,
Bill.
well, and it points to our opportunity or challenge of just education. As simple as some of these points are, but, there's always some element of the community who just doesn't hear and doesn't know that, and so, we may just have a handful of key bullet points, but just making sure that people understand those points.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Bo, is I had talked with staff earlier, and that was the point that I made, is that we need to make sure that all the information is out there, and that we talk about it, not just wait for people to find it. That we're very putting it out there versus just saying, oh, well, it's here, just go look at our website. We need to be more than that.
So I looked it up. 64% approval on proposal 1, and it looks like there were around 12,400 voters in 2015.
What time of year is that?
That was in November 4, 2015.
I'm pretty sure there was a city
Supposedly,
election.
It was
Same night.
tighter, right?
Pardon me,
The
yes,
second-
I didn't look at part 2, I can look at that.
It was tighter.
Let's see, proposal 1.
I think it passed like.
Proposal 2, 56% of voters approved of that.
Just tighter.
So in August, you're gonna get totally different population voting, I would think.
Maybe not. 2015 was not a year for congressional elections or presidential. That's an odd year, and we don't vote for those things in those years, so people had to come out. There may have been other things on the ballot, but people had to make the effort to come out and vote at that time.
So, Gary, I just remember when you shared this data with us last year.
Yep.
Last year's version of this slide made me uncomfortable.
It was different, yes.
This year's version does not make me uncomfortable. I say that just to signal that to my colleagues. I mean, there's a complete different feel in, for me, with that pie chart compared to last year.
Well, the interesting thing, though, is we've got proportional moves on both of the charts. The support of the plan last year to this year proportionally moved up in the same way that voting for the bond proportionally moved up. So they're both moving in lockstep. And we also saw the same correlation between fiscally responsible and that support. So yes, everything is moved, bracketed up effectively across all 3 questions.
Yeah.
I also think the 8-point-whatever% of people who might change their mind due to COVID, that seems like a really reasonable number to me. I mean, I can't foresee that I would change my opinion one way or the other by then, but things have been so crazy this past year. You know, if the world falls in half, yeah, that would change my opinion. But to me, though, that was lower than I would have expected.
Yeah, Keith, when you read into this, if you look really across unsure and yes, what you will see is the 2 things that come up are personal finances. What is my personal financial situation within my family or household? And the second one is, will children be in school? That's the other half of this one. So if you go back and you look at the comments to this one, keep that in mind. To be blunt about it, if children are able to be in school this fall, I think that accommodates a lot of the concerns that you will see. Not all of them, but it accommodates a lot of concerns from people about whether or not they would change their vote.
I have a question for Mark, I think. Obviously, if we approve this and it gets approved, and then all our major building things are on cycle. We've done the high schools, we've done the middle school. Part of this thing is buses and technology, obviously, and that's, you know, you use that up in 4 to 5 years. What do you do after that? Okay, because the buses have always been out of this type of stuff. Do you have to, you know, in 2028, do you have to go to the people for buses and technology when you've used that money up? How does that work from a long-term planning strategy from the district? And probably none of us will be on the board at this point, but I hate to leave somebody in a vacuum, you know, in 2028 or whatever that would be, you know, because, you know, we'll need buses and technology at that point too. So how does that work, Mark?
Well, you really have 2 options at that point. One is you make adjustments to your general operating fund and, you know, cut programs and other things that you do. Or you go back to voters for technology and buses. So yeah, we've been very fortunate that we've been able to couple our building projects with buses, or our buses and technology with building projects. So it's really worked well for the district using that strategy. But you know, either we'd have to go separately for that or figure out a way to absorb it from the general fund, try to find ways to make our buses last longer. You know, technology, you know, Dan could tell you, changes much more rapidly than, you know, some of the other things. So it is a challenge to have a consistent flow of funds to support buses and technology.
when would our next window be financially that we could go back and raise more money without raising their millage again? Is that 6, 8 years from now that we have some of our bonds fall off? And how does that work for us going out into the future? I mean, and you probably don't know that.
I don't have that information in front of me. I know as it was alluded to in the one question, the millage, the debt levy rate goes down if this doesn't get approved.
Right.
So, that trend line tends to go down over time, so
Right.
and it depends on how you structure your bond sale too.
Sure.
There's different ways of doing that, so I couldn't tell you specifically when that would happen. We would have to really get our financial advisor
Could you ask our
involved.
financial, just so that we're not leaving the next group behind the 8 ball, that, 5, 6, 7 years from now, that they have an opportunity maybe to keep the millage the same again and raise more money for buses and technology, because most of our capital building things are gonna be done, after we're done with this.
So we,
Well, I will tell you,
we experienced that though, after the high school bonds, they ran out, and we had a couple years where we were buying buses out of the general fund.
but really, this puts us in that roughly 10-year cycle. So, this bond
Right.
passed would get us to 10 years, and then I think that's a point where you'd start seeing a drop-off in taxes again, in the debt rate.
Okay,
So I think that opportunity would present itself at about the right time.
okay. I just don't wanna leave the next group behind the financial, that, we don't wanna do that to whoever comes after us.
The other thing to consider, though, is in 10 years, this building will be getting close to 20 years old. So we may have things that we need to do to either maintain buildings, add on something, come back for
Right.
something else that we're not even anticipating at this point. Who would have thought, in 1980 that you'd be putting a bond forth to put computer labs
Right.
on buildings? It just wasn't, there are concepts that we don't even know about right now.
Yeah, in that chart that was shared with you by Jesse Nelson, I think it showed the next decline, the way it's structured right now, would be in 2032.
So 10 years from now,
Mhm.
basically, 10 years,
Mhm.
right? So my memory was about correct. Gary, thank you very much it was a great report.
Yeah, Gary, this is,
I just wanted to comment real quick. So the comment section, I found this, some of it was fairly entertaining, but that's almost our guide of how we approach the community. There are some good concerns there. I think there's some people who are just gonna vote no and they're gonna give you negative comments, but the ones I think, like the ones who say are fiscally irresponsible, they just don't wanna agree with it, that we're not. But I think the overcrowding issues and the size issues are kind of some true concerns that people don't, people have. Or what if we build too big and we don't have the kids? And I would say, well, guys, you build too big because it's cheaper to build too big than build too small and realize you didn't build big enough. It's a lot cheaper. But even, we're voting to do this, but I think, Mark, help me here, that the plans can change a little bit, right? I mean, how we're building buildings and how many kids we're doing, it's a little bit.
Well,
Things could change, but 6 years from now, we're gonna have a better idea how many kids are in elementary buildings. And
Yes, that.
adjustments we're gonna make.
One of the things that this plan allows you to do is, as you're completing that first 3 facilities, you really have an opportunity to take a look and revisit your class sizes, your enrollments by
Right.
buildings, the demographics of the district, where the population shifts are. So this plan gives you that opportunity to do that.
Right, to pull
To
some
make some-
levers, turn some dials and
Yes.
make it work.
Yeah, you're
So
not
I
locked
just
into-
think that's a good message to give people who have these concerns of too big, too small, overcrowding, not enough, I don't, I just say, hey, this isn't all gonna, it's not a set in stone super, so, we have a good plan, but I think we can hit some toggles and twist some knobs and it'll get better.
Well, it gives you that, this plan also gives you that immediate, safety valve with, if you increase Central by 150 students, you have it automatically, the short-term ability to move some students around.
Right.
And then see how the rest plays out.
But Gary, I really like what you said about making that information available. Sometimes our problem is just the communication piece. And not have people look for it, but just put it out there. We know what their concerns are, put it out there, give it a real shot.
Yeah, to Rusty's point, Celeste, and my counsel to you here is just very straightforward. There's some things which I think you would look at and say, there's a misperception of what is reality. And there's other things where there's just an absence of information. That if this person just knew these three things, that would abate a concern that they might have. And so, Rusty, I'm thrilled that you looked at this part. I counsel all of you trustees to look at the responses section. And if nothing else, if you just highlight the couple ones that you go, boy, this one, people just don't understand what's really happening and we need to correct that. And this one here, there's just this bit of information that if we could just put that out there. I don't think our takeaway from this is that we're gonna change people's minds and everyone's gonna vote yes for it. But I think our takeaway from this is there are perceptions and or information voids that I think we owe it to our residents to fill. We should just be responsive to that, say, and here is that information and here's what is, in the plan, or here's what's going on so that they have that. So I appreciate that, Rusty, thank you.
We did do that in 2015 too. I think we did do a good job of educating the public that supported us, especially for the stadiums, what the rationale was behind each school needing a stadium and how things were so different now than they were in 1958, and it worked. So we should be able to do that.
But keep in mind that came up again, kind of thing, because it's an emotional thing.
Yes.
It's an emotional response instead of a concrete data and facts.
But it's not surprising that we still get anti-stadium people, because we had 56% vote yes, so we had 44% people vote no. Okay, and they're still frustrated by that they didn't get what they wanted, okay? So, I mean, obviously, we just need 50.1% to make it happen, but will be people, no different than where we are in the country and everything else, I mean, there's a group that's gonna be disenfranchised no matter which way we vote, so.
This has been a very helpful session.
Yeah, I'm glad we did this survey. It was really helpful. I'm glad you did the survey, Gary. Nice job.
It's been my pleasure to work with you again. Right.
Thank you for your presentation. Thank you, Mark. Anything else for the good of the order? Okay, very good. We stand adjourned. Thank you.